There are various ways we experience play with our children. One of those ways we call free play. And free play is completely imaginative. There's nothing ever that is directed other than what the child comes up with on their own. It is entirely directed by the child. And then there is something called structured play. And that is when we use play to help our children go in the direction we want them to go. We have intention. Some people also call it intentional play because there is an intention that we have for our kids when we're doing this structure. When we don't allow these kinds of play with our children, we actually are creating some problems for our kids because their developing mind needs it. Today's guest tears apart some of the issues that are happening and what we can do about it for our children. So join in today. You will want to grab a pen and piece of paper because this is worth taking notes. Does your child have a speech-language delay and you really want them to talk? Do difficult behaviors derail home life and you know the frustration is a communication struggle? Does your child see a speech therapist and you wonder, what do they do and how can I help? If these or similar questions are in your mind, this podcast is for you. Hello, my name is Dina Lynn Rosenbush. I am a speech-language pathologist that has worked with children from birth to 21 for 3 decades. And in my classrooms, I see you wanting to connect with the heart of your child, but their speech and language skills create a barrier. So if you have a kiddo that has difficult behaviors, needs to expand their language or learn to say speech sounds, and maybe even receives speech therapy, stay tuned. Because in this podcast, you will learn how to use your daily life as a tool to communication practice and how to do that practice. You will become confident knowing you are making the difference you want to make. And you will hear success stories of parents who have navigated these struggles already. We'll do this all while focusing on building deep, meaningful connection and confidence in your kiddo. So grab a cup of coffee along with a notebook and pen. It's time to speak in the way your child's brain understands. And that is the language of play. Welcome to episode 201. Can you believe it? It's kind of amazing to me. If you missed out on the last episode, I announced that there would be free gifts. You just email me at hello@thelanguageofplay.com, and I still have some remaining. So if you're interested in a book or coaching, let me know. The book is free and the coaching is discounted substantially in honor of 200 episodes. My hope in this is to develop a small cohort where we would be able to work together as families. So if that is of interest to you, absolutely email me. Now is the time, hello@thelanguageofplay.com. All right, now let's get into this pre-recorded episode with Leroy Slanzi, and we unpack what is play and the power of play and what happens in the absence of play. Today we have Leroy Slanzi here. He is an expert educator with a remarkable 25-year career in education. He's an author, and he penned the influential book Emotional Schools, delving into the importance of emotional intelligence and mental health in the education system. Leroy also excels as a facilitator of professional development sessions and has been on numerous podcasts and is sought after for his work that helps parents, teachers, and schools through the chaos that life brings. Leroy, I am delighted to have you on the language of play. In our conversation already, we've talked about the theme of play, the importance that it has, how expansive play really is. It's not really a small topic. Tell me how it is that you got into this, because I know your story is fabulous.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate being on your show. For me, I started in education 25 years ago, but it probably goes back further to when I was a child. And, as a 50-year-old man, Gen Xer, we grew up at a time where play was prominent in our lives. We were outside all the time. Our entertainment had nothing to do with technology. And, early on, I was that kid who organized other kids to make sure that, whether we were playing Tonkas or we were playing road hockey or, taking our BMXs around the park or whatnot. Early on, I loved being a active participant in play. And when I got into teaching, it was still 25 years ago, it was still pretty prominent that kids were playing more than they were on technology. And I think after about, I don't know, I'd say 10 to 12 years after teaching, I started to see a shift in kids' abilities to just cope with small stressors. It really started with seeing sleep deprivation creep into classrooms and whatnot. And then I noticed kids weren't able to play as well as they used to play. And
Tell me about that, because I see that too, and I see it not
Mhm.
only in play, but I see it in conversation.
Absolutely. I think, I'm going to be a little bit all over the map. So like if
Okay.
we talk 15 years ago, it started with sleep deprivation. And I think that's when gaming systems started to come out. And then of course, if kids are sleep deprived, they don't communicate that well. They don't handle conflicts that well. They don't handle stress that well. But what I noticed on the playgrounds is a shift in how kids played and how creative they were in their play. And in the last, I would say, and which is the reason why I wrote the book in the last few years, is that ever since then, ever since 15 years ago to now, in the last 10 years, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And, the infusion of technology not has only affected kids in their play, but it's affected communication in the homes because, parents are sitting on their cell phones doing this and saying to kids, go away. So the communication between parent and child isn't what it used to be. And, right down to when a kid is an infant and, you'd make sure that you're co-regulating with your kid, you'd communicate with goo goo gaga and you're making sounds and doing all those things. Well, that's dissipating in homes. And you start to see it. I see it. We're lucky in the school I'm at. We have a speech language pathologist that's here 2 days a week. We're very lucky. But every year when we assess kids in kindergarten for their speech and language abilities, there is an increase in the amount of kids who need interventions because basic communication between parents and children are not happening. Whereas when I say to a kid, for example, hey, I need you to stand in front of so-and-so, they look at me like, what does in front of mean? Even not basic understanding. So there's that oral language piece, and then there's the communication for understanding piece, even the communication through gestures and facial expressions. It's just dissipating and dissipating and dissipating.
Yeah, so I am hearing so many topics right now, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
even sure which one to grab first because I certainly have seen this too. I have also worked in the school system for 30 years and I've watched how the difference in our students' capabilities to interact has changed with the advent of technology. One of the things you said early on here is play has shifted, creativity has changed. Now, I have seen that creativity is lessened. Is that the kind of change that you're referring to? I'm
Yeah,
assuming so.
I,
And if so,
yeah,
can you expand on what do you mean by that? And I've just got so many questions that I want to tease out of what you've
sure.
said.
So here, I'll put it in a real traditional sense. So back in the
Yeah.
day, when I was bored at home as a kid, or my sister, my brother, and I were bored, Dad would say, we would say we're bored, and he'd say go outside and play, and we'd say with what? And he goes, there's rocks and sticks. We'd go outside, and next thing you know, we'd play for hours with rocks and sticks, building whatever, creating characters, and next thing you know, we're in a tree building a fort. And I think the shift in terms of creativity has shifted where kids do not have the ability when they're bored to make that adjustment to create something out of nothing. And by nothing, I mean tangible objects that are available if you look outside, like kids looking for four-leaf clovers, things like that. But on the flip side, I also see kids who are incredibly creative with technology, and that's the generation we're in. And in the school system, kids are doing things with technology I couldn't dream of doing. However, that's laced in in this notion that kids are able to have the patience to be creative without technology, because they're not as patient to be creative without technology, because that technology, that gaming system creates that dopamine hit that's repetitive, right? So I think that's the difference that I see, is there's not enough patience, there's not enough perseverance and grit to get to that creativity like there used to be.
That's interesting. I haven't thought about patience, perseverance, and grit to get through boredom. I just
Mm-hmm.
haven't put those together before. Obviously, you're right, but I haven't thought about it from that perspective. I've thought about the idea of boredom, certainly, and that when a child is then relocated into a different environment, work through it, take some time, just start playing, and
Yeah.
then actively start to use the items to make them be something else in the imagination space.
Yeah.
And I haven't really thought about it though with those words. And I think you're onto something really powerful there, that it is a skill that we need to stretch and we can teach and train. And I think that when parents start to do it, they're teaching and training. And I heard you say the co-regulation when mamas are holding their babies, for example. And then what do you see going on with that is impacting the child's ability to not play with the three-dimensional
Well,
world?
yeah, I see a couple of things, and this is going to sound like almost counterintuitive in the sense, but I see parents who co-regulate, and they dive in and they mother and they nurture in an overbearing way. So they don't let kids sit in discomfort, right? And
Oh,
then I see the parent who is just basically on their phone, and don't want to use the word neglectful, but they're distracted parents.
mhm.
And so what you have is you don't have this place where kids have that co-regulation when they ultimately need it from parents, or you have kids who don't get it at all. And so you have the helicopter parent, and then you have the distracted parent. And, I think, I'm sure you know who Barbara Coloroso is.
Mhm.
And, her work talks about, the child, if, he wants to go outside without a jacket on and it's cold outside, and you remind him to put a jacket on once, twice. And if he doesn't, we'll let him go outside without a jacket on, and he'll figure out that it's cold outside, and he'll have to work through that discomfort. And so I think there's this place of parents who don't allow kids to work through discomfort, and then there's a place where parents just don't even help their kids through discomfort. And so there's got to be a happy balance between that co-regulation piece and being too involved, where you're trying to take over for your kids. And so they don't have, that's where that grit and that perseverance would typically develop early on. Like if you have a little infant and they're trying to climb up onto something, a lot of parents will get in and they'll put their hand under their bum and they'll help them up onto the chair. Well, just step back, let them struggle a little bit, and it starts early on. And so I think you have parents and kids, where again that attachment bond is non-existent, and then that attachment bond is just overbearing. And then there's obviously there's and I don't want to paint all parents and all kids with the same brush, because there's a lot of kids and parents who are doing a fantastic job, and kids aren't struggling with that intrinsic motivation or their speech and whatnot. But what we're seeing is what once used to be 5% of kids struggling, then it was 10%. Now it's 20 to 25% of kids in a classroom that are struggling. And that number is increasing every year. And it's not just Canadian data or United States data. You just have to go on the World Health Organization and you see it. You
Yes.
see more anxiety disorders, more mood disorders, more behavior disorders. And it's increasing, and it comes down to that ability to persevere through difficult things, stressful things. And that's where, bringing it back to play built those skills,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. Now, it sounds like we're really leaning into parent education. Parents need to
Mm-hmm.
know their part. Like, am I more of a helicopter? Am I more of a distracted? We probably are on that teeter-totter ourselves throughout the day.
We are.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We are. And, I can't sit here and, I'm preaching to the choir, but, my kids have called me on being on my phone too much. As a principal of of a school. When I was a principal of a high school, it was really bad because it was constant, the communication with teachers and parents. It was relentless, right? And so for me to stay ahead of my day, I would have to be walking around with my phone. Whereas, my kids are like, Dad, you'd come outside and play with us, or Dad, you'd interact more, which is the communication piece. And so thankfully I had a daughter who called me on it quite early, and but I made those mistakes, and I've gotten a lot better at it and whatnot. And so I think that's the key as parents, and the school system as well. The school system, because I don't want to throw it all on parents, because
Right.
Parents are there from 0 to 5 years old, and they lay that foundation. But when kids get to school, there is an emphasis that schools have to put on that social emotional learning and that play-based learning as well, because it isn't the 1970s and 1980s where kids will sit there patiently and learn how to do math or English or socials, and work through it. It's a different generation of kids who are coming in lacking a lot of those competency-based skills, that it has to go hand in hand. And it's difficult because parents, teachers will often say, well, that's a parent's job, and a parent will say, well, that's a teacher's job. Well, at the end of the day, yes,
It's
from birth to
everybody's.
5, but at 5 years old, when those kids hit preschool and kindergarten, it's all of us. We all need to step up and do right by these kids to help them through this.
Mm-hmm. You bring in the communication and you talk about mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, play is a big component of this. So, can you make that link between a child that is struggling with their communication and how it is that their mental health is impacted when they don't have these communication skills? What are you seeing?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll go off on a little side tangent here to kind of put it into perspective. So one of the ways that you can tell when a kid has a learning disability in school is because you'll see their behavior they'll have poor behavior that'll come up, because it's easier to look like a class clown than it is to look like they're dumb. And so a lot of times it's like, why is this kid misbehaving? Right. And it's like, okay, let's figure it out. And it's because they're embarrassed in class because they're struggling with reading or writing or whatnot. And, so it's the same thing that we're starting to see with communication, is when kids struggle with communication, where they're struggling with, those peer interactions, and they're in more conflicts because they can't handle or figure out how to meander through their peer relationships. It manifests in behavior, and then it turns into they're anxious to go outside at recess, or, they all of a sudden they're going to act up in class because, they're struggling with communicating. Like I have a little guy right now that I see almost every day, and I work through some soothing strategies and some co-regulation with him, because he has no idea. He's constantly in kids' faces, or he's constantly poking. He hasn't learned that spatial awareness yet because of, from when he was a baby till now, he's behind the 8 ball, right? And so in a school, when I see kids that have difficulty with just basic cordial behavior, which is, all those ways to communicate, those conflict resolution skills, and they can't really play with their peers without upsetting them. That's when you start seeing these kids, you'll start to revert to poor behaviors. Then it'll just manifest into potential mental health issues as they get older, right? And that's why play-based programs, like the program that I use and that I facilitate, is called Play is the Way. It is a fantastic program that uses play to elicit emotion, to teach kids to self-regulate and self-soothe. And it incorporates all the communication competencies, the social and personal awareness competencies. And at my school, I've actually incorporated 2 recesses and a lunch. So instead of just 1 recess and a lunch, I've added a second recess to increase the free play.
Good.
Right.
Good.
It's crucial. It's crucial. And I'm not in the public system anymore. I'm in an independent school, so I have a little more freedom to do what we need to do. And my staff truly understands that our kids aren't playing as much, and that's where, they develop these skills. And as a matter of fact, sometimes I see teachers wanting to intervene with certain play that's going on with kids, because it gets a little heated sometimes. And I grab them like, no, let's let them work through this. Yes, there might be some yelling, but let's see if they can get through it. And you'll see kids will be, and then all of a sudden it's like they work through it.
Yep.
And they calm. And so
you feel so proud of them when they do that.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And it's hard because teachers are very controlling. Like they're
Yeah.
to a T. We like to make sure kids are like they're in an assembly. They need to sit. They need to sit up straight. And I always tell teachers, no, back off. This is up to them. I will wait. I will wait for them to take some deep breaths, to regulate, to work through whatever it is that they've got the jumping jelly beans in their pants there that's making them. I'll wait, right?
Yep.
And so that as a school, we infuse free and structured play to help with the emotional intelligence piece and the mental health piece and the communication piece, right? It's very important.
I love that. I think that you're picking up the ball where your speech therapist can't stay. You said she was there 2 days a week, right?
Yes,
And I
yes.
bet in a program like you're running, you could so use her 5 days a week full time.
Yeah, and you know what? She loves our program
Oh,
because
I'm
it's
sure she
I mean, you can
does.
see behind me that all the colored
Hmm.
posters. So
Yes.
those are our key concepts that we use, and they're throughout our whole school. So it's a common language that we use for the whole school. So the grade 7 teacher, the grade kindergarten teacher has these in their classrooms. The secretary, the lunch lady, the principal.
And
Yeah,
listeners, I will say that I will have Leroy's link to his website and his book in the show notes. And I have seen these posters on his website.
yeah,
So
they're
I will
beautiful.
have a link. Yeah. So you can go take a look at them and get a framework yourself of what he's talking about.
Yeah, and that goes back to that communication piece. When the grade 7 teacher is outside and they're interacting with kindergarten kids who they don't teach, but they use this language. It's
Hmm.
the same language the kindergarten teacher's using. So this is why our speech language pathologist, she loves the fact that we're using this universal language. We're all developing the same competencies. We're always using play to communicate. So she's very happy because we can continually, you know, add on and help whatever she's doing when she's not here as much as possible. On top of, we have an education assistant, a speech and language education assistant. So when she's not here, she still does the pull out and works on all those things with sounds in your mouth and all of that fine speech stuff that you know very well.
That's so great. Now, before we end this, I want to ask you to dive into the idea of play. You said you use play to teach these things, but for the parent that is listening and they're wondering, like, how do you use play? We just talked about go play with rocks outside. I'm not talking to them and they're bored and we're telling them to go
Mm-hmm.
play alone and
Yeah.
and their minds aren't necessarily beyond a pile of rocks. How do you play? Tell me what you
Yeah,
mean in this case. I have lots
yeah,
of ideas in my head, but who knows what you've
yeah,
got in
for
your head?
sure. I think when you look at play, you have to stream it into free play and
Hmm.
structured play. And free play is that you go find some rocks and you sticks and you're creative and you come up with games and which is very important because that's how kids are develop those critical thinking and creative thinking skills.
Hmm.
And then there's structured play. So for example, every Monday in my school, we have an assembly and I play a game with the whole school. This morning I made the teachers play actually. And so it's a structured play where we play a certain game and the whole intent is for me to make the game difficult for the kids so that it's hard and they feel those emotions because
Okay.
we teach them to soothe when they feel it. So I could teach if you think about social emotional programs like Mind Up or Open Parachute or programs like that, they're very sit, watch, let's discuss programs. And the learning isn't as profound and strong unless there's an emotional attachment. It's like
Right.
you and I both know if you burn your hand on the stove, you'll never touch the stove again because you felt it. And
Right.
so we use structured play to elicit emotion so we can teach kids to self-regulate and self-soothe. So then when they are outside playing and they feel that feeling in their stomach, they know how to take deep breaths and they know how to soothe and they know how to bring themselves back, right? So, I think for parents, I think they need to think of, okay, I need free play for that creativity, that critical thinking, and those conflict resolution skills that they should develop with their siblings, or which never really goes that well, or their friends. I have a son and a daughter, and holy man, they can go at it sometimes. And then there's the
It can
structured
go well,
play.
but it doesn't go smoothly.
Yeah, that's right. They're great now. Now that they're teenagers, they love each other. And then there's the structured play, which is intentional. So if you think of Lego and you want to develop those intrinsic motivations, so it's great. Play Lego. But what I would do is would research things that can spin off of Lego, so you can intentionally say, hey, you know what? You're playing Lego. Why don't we try building a model airplane? And just kind of stream off of it. So I think for parents, when they think play, think free play, think structured play, and think intentional play. So that structured play allows you, if it's Legos, you spin off in that so you can intentionally move them into play-based things that they can develop that curiosity and creativity and all of that really fantastic communication type stuff and that character development type stuff, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I just wrote a little bit of that down as I think to myself, maybe that would be a good episode title. We'll have to see what I come up with by the time this goes out.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that is so powerful. So to summarize that, we're going to think of play in only two categories in order to be able to encapsulate it in our heads. One is free play, and that is our creativity. That is that problem solving. And then we've got our structured play, and that is intentional by parents or teachers to be able to teach a specific skill. So we may use Legos in the way they're intended, and we may use them in the way they're not intended because we're using them the way we intend.
That's
not
right.
The way the creator intended, but we have a goal in mind. So our structured play is using something to create the end goal that I want to teach this child. Would
Absolutely.
you say I summarized you correctly?
You did. The one thing that we do with the Play is the Way program is we specifically use that structured play to teach emotional intelligence and self-regulation skills, those breathing and mindful techniques. So, for us, that's one of our main premises. And then, of course, teachers use structured play to develop curiosity and exploration too. So, you can spin off of it. You think of a car salesman selling you a car, and it's like they keep trying to upgrade you, right? And that's what I think of when it comes to structured play, is that you can spin off of structured play into a million different areas. Even math, we have play-based activities for math because there's no better learning tool than play, because it brings feeling into your learning. And when you feel, when you learn, you won't forget it, right?
Yeah, you're accessing those emotional centers, which gives you more power and more memory.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
And it causes retrievability to happen quicker.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's cool stuff, eh?
It is cool. Obviously, my podcast is titled The Language of Play. I have a very, very strong passion for what it is that we do with play and how we can take play and broaden it and think so differently about it. You talk about creativity, and sometimes people differentiate play and creativity, but they're not. Sometimes we think about exploration, adventure, experimentation. All of those kind of things are forms of play. And
they are.
Yeah.
So many spin-offs.
Yeah.
Yep. Spin-offs everywhere in play. Everywhere.
Thank you for the work that you are doing in the world. I know that you are making a vast difference for the families that you work with specifically in your school. But I also know now that you have a YouTube channel and you're taking this information and your experiences and spreading them out to other people, you're helping a lot of people to understand what play is. And the impact is going to be blown up, I hope, because this is good stuff.
Yeah, I hope so. And with my YouTube channel, like my last two videos were on ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder, and they're directed to teachers and parents at the same time, because I really try to push that collaboration piece between the home and the school and understanding, because teachers struggle with kids, for example, who have ADHD, and parents struggle with kids who have ADHD. And there's a lot of finger pointing and blame game stuff. And so, that's what I'm trying to do on my YouTube channel, which is a little different than when I go and I do all these workshops around play and mental health and social emotional well-being. But one of my other goals is to just bring teachers and parents together over those real tough things, right? Like ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder and intrinsic motivation. And the next one will be learning disabilities. And so that's kind of like a side thing that I want as a principal and a parent for schools too. So, yeah.
Well, I love that, because, that's what I'm trying to do too, is give the information from speech pathology into the hands of parents so that they can practice in the same way at home and build those communication skills, which foundationally is how do we communicate through play to connect with the brain so much faster, better, deeper, stronger. Excellent work.
At the end of the day, it's all communication.
Yes.
It really is.
It is.
It is.
It
yeah.
is. It really and it's relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
And if
And
the
you can't have a good one without communicating properly.
That's
right?
true. And
That's
our
it.
children don't do the work to please the teacher. They're really doing the work because of the relationship with mom and dad, and they want mom and dad's approval and support and acceptance. And
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a big part of it for sure. Yeah.
Ah, thank you. I love this conversation. I think I could talk about these kind of concepts for hours.
We could. That's
Yeah.
the thing. When I go and I do a workshop, and they're usually about 5 hours, 5.5 hours a day, I could go for 8 hours easy. I'm sure people wouldn't want to listen to me for 8 hours, but you could make a whole weekend out of this topic in particular for sure.
Yes. And it would be worthwhile for everybody.
It would.
So thank you for doing it. Really, truly.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes. And thank you for being on the Language of Play. And listeners, you will check the show notes for sure. Do that, because you will find connections to Leroy in the show notes.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Hey parents, I hope you found this episode helpful. If so, would you please take 30 seconds and share it with a friend who also lives or works with children? I would really appreciate it if you would leave a quick review for the show on Apple Podcasts. I read every review, and it lights me up to know that this show is making a difference. Then come join my Facebook community, where you'll meet other parents who are dedicated to helping their children grow too. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me. Now it's time to go. Let's pop our kiddos in the strollers and go look around outdoors and see what we have to talk about.